I'm pleased to be joined today by Dr. Alan Levinovitz. He's an associate professor of religion at James Madison University and author of Natural: How Faith in Nature's Goodness Leads to Harmful Fads, Unjust Laws, and Flawed Science. Alan, welcome to the Nature and Nurture
Really happy to
podcast.
be here, Adam. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So what's the story of how natural came into being?
Well, it started when I got into researching food. So I wrote a book called, I hate the title, but I didn't get to choose the title. Pro tip to all future authors. If you're writing a non-academic book, you don't get to choose the title. It's called The Gluten Lie. And what that book was about was an analysis of how people come to fear various foods, so fat, salt, sugar, and gluten. And I look at the history of those foods and sort of analyze it from analyze it from a religious studies perspective. And when I was interviewing people about foods they were scared of and that sort of thing, the naturalness always came up. So they always tell me, I want to eat what's natural. And because I'm that kind of guy, I'd always be like, well, what do you mean? And they would say, well, depends, right? If they're vegans, they would say, I only want to eat vegetables because that's what we were meant to eat naturally. And it was only, blah, blah, blah. And carnivores, which is a carnivory diet, they say, I only want to eat natural things. And, I remember once I was at a farmer's market and there was people in line for getting smoothies, right? Like natural organic smoothies. I was like, I only like natural smoothies. And there's like protein powders and all this kind of stuff. I was like, that's gotta be the least natural thing in the world, right? Mm-hmm. So I was like, well, I'm wondering what people really mean when they say natural. And I started thinking about it harder. And I realized pretty quickly that it wasn't just in the realm of food. It was in the realm of medicine. It was in the realm of economic markets. It was in the realm of birth, right? Natural birth. It was natural child rearing. It was, you name it, right? And I realized that this term, natural, was phenomenally powerful. Mm-hmm. And the idea was cross-cultural and trans-historical. And so I said, well, yeah, I got to do this. I got to figure out what this is doing. And it's just a much bigger project than looking at it in the context of medicine or
the trans-historical element is the most surprising to me because it seems like most of our ideas of things that aren't natural come with industrialization. But what are some examples of like pre-industrial era favoring natural over unnatural?
Yeah, so one of these, and you're gonna get some scholar of ancient Greece or something like that who's going to say, well, nature meant something very different back then, which is true, right? When Aristotle deploys nature, he doesn't mean the same thing that we mean today. And when people said natural in 1700, they didn't mean the same thing that we did today. So it's not that the meaning has been constant, but I'm going to give you an example from my own area of scholarly expertise, which is ancient China. The term that's typically translated as natural is ziran, which means self-so, something that is so of itself. That is to say, it is not the way it is because of human will. It is the way it is naturally. That is to say, without human will. And so you think about this like with organic, right? So if you think about this is an organic movement or an organic protest. What we mean really is it was spontaneous. It emerged of itself, rather, grassroots, right? As opposed to astroturf, right? They're astroturfing this, what people mean is there was some corporation or some powerful figure who engineered the protest, okay? And that's what people, so that's a constant, is the idea of the absence of human will, or if not the absence of human will as an organizing principle, at least the harmony of human will with some other organizing principle that isn't human. And that led me pretty quickly to realize that natural was a theological term.
Right. That almost sounds kind of Freudian, right? Is it like a coping mechanism that rather than having a bunch of stuff outside of your control, you come up with this sort of natural teleological explanation for it?
I think it's part of it. Yeah. I mean, people don't like uncertainty and people don't like complexity. because, cognitive load is tough. You got to use your brain for other stuff. And one thing that is helpful for reducing cognitive load is to come up with a kind of simple heuristic for figuring out why the things, how to choose what you choose. And also, in a weird way, how to reassure yourself when you're not certain that what you're choosing is right. And so, for example, I'll give you an example of child rearing. Natural child rearing movements are very selective. It's not like everything's natural. There are no wild animals in the home in natural child rearing movements. It's a concept that's deployed at moments of uncertainty. So the parallel to this in anthropological studies of magic is that, if you go look at traditional societies that have magic, they don't use magic to make a canoe. That's not how you make a canoe. You'd think so, right? In a movie, if there's a magician, right, or a sorcerer, right, they'd be like, "Wooja booja boo," and like the canoe appears.
Yes.
But that's actually not how magic works. It's only used to address uncertain things. The weather, whether there will be fish out in the ocean or not. Cast a magic spell. A love potion, right? So now there's a parallel here, which is that humans have all kinds of powerful symbolic constructs that help them deal with uncertainty.
Reconcile
and that's a
that
part
type
of
of
it.
view with the negative side of natural, like death and disease are natural disasters are natural.
That's right. Well, as I say to my wife, don't make me defend something that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make any sense. Of course. It's, on its face, it's absurd. But we do a lot of absurd stuff, Adam, because we're scared, or we're in pain, or we're uncertain.
So if we think about this from an evolutionary perspective, how did those beliefs emerge? Like, were they adaptive to some degree?
Great question. You mean like beliefs in what I'm calling a transhistorical understanding of naturalness? Yeah.
Or even more broadly, those types of religious beliefs, thinking.
Well, it's not just religious beliefs. It's not just religious beliefs. That's really important, because natural is a secular term,
Right.
Nominally, at least. Magic actually is in a weird way secular, right? So hell, free will is secular. So is there an adaptive benefit? Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure what the term is from psychology. The people watching this, if they're into psychology, will know better than I. But there's like cognitive load reduction stuff. People have done studies on this, which is that, you can't, uncertainty is very paralyzing for the vast majority of human beings. And so you can't, that's going to kill you sometimes. And you also just need to save time. You can't be making, so there's a lot of decisions, for example, that are 50-50. You may have encountered this in your own life, right? You're like, should I do this or that, right? And it's like, well, I don't know. The truth is, it just doesn't matter. Just flip a coin and get the hell out of it, right? Oracles are another form of this, right? How do you deal with uncertainty? You go to an oracle, you flip a coin, you do a random number, right? So there's all sorts of tools for getting us over the paranoia that we have about being uncertain. And the reason that that paranoia exists, as I understand it, is because sometimes decisions are bad. You can make bad decisions. And this is tied to the fact that people don't like regretting decisions they've made. This is something that's very common in studies of gambling. So a lot of our irrationalities is that we will make bad decisions, rationally bad decisions, in order to avoid having to blame ourselves for making a bad decision. And so I think that that's also something that's going on, which is that if you outsource the decision to naturalness, then you don't have to worry about it. You didn't, okay, I got my kid an organic mattress. At least I don't have to blame myself for their allergies. You know what I mean? Whereas in fact, it's just totally random.
Right. So in the past, people might have ascribed these random things to like the will of the gods, like good things happening. Maybe it's rain, the gods are pleased with you, they're rewarding you, and then bad things happen like drought or famine, and it's like the gods must be angry with us for something. Do you think?
I guess that's a different. Well, go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
Well, I'm wondering if, as that religious belief waned over time if we started replacing it with this more secular but also still religious in some ways conception of natural?
Yeah, well, I don't like the word religious in this context. I mean, in part because if you go back far enough, right? I mean, let's say pre 1850. I don't know. I'm not a historian. There was no distinction between religion and science.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think it's weird to kind of go back to, the ancient Greeks or ancient China or whatever it is, and distinguish between divine forces, for example, and scientific force. I mean, they're all the same thing, right? Astrology was also astronomy.
Mm-hmm.
So I would instead of like, we had religion, and then I mean you're right. I understand what you're saying. I just want to be careful here. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I think a better way to address it, a more neutral, accurate way, is to say we have always had cognitive labor-saving devices that help us address anxiety about uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
And those take different forms in different time periods. And naturalness is one of them. But I want to say something else about natural that I think is important, because when I was approaching editors to write this book, what people wanted was kind of like a Richard Dawkins style takedown of natural, right? But instead of God, it's nature. But that's just not what it is. So there's a couple of things about naturalness that are really important. For one, like, nature's crazy, Adam.
Mm-hmm.
Like, can you believe that there's an organizing force that exists beyond and before human beings that made like dinosaurs? Like, that is bonkers. It is just ridiculous. I mean, like flowers, crystals, the universe, like the laws of physics, like all of this stuff. These are forms of organism. Us.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be religious. Everyone knows, like, whether you're agnostic or whether you're an atheist, there is a deep and powerful mystery.
Right.
So I understand why people would think to themselves, especially when confronted with uncertainty or trauma or pain, maybe it has something to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, so I keep using the term religious. I want to step away from that. But what would you call that type of belief? Like, even rational atheist scientists, we seem to have this type of belief in, like, these natural laws are out there and they're good, they're true. We can strive to understand them.
Whoa, stop. That was really important. So natural laws are out there and they are true. They are not good.
Mm-hmm.
That's the problem. So what I would call this kind of belief is, and philosophers, unfortunately, if there's a professional philosopher watching this out there, sorry, you're wrong. They aren't as interested in what was called the is-ought distinction anymore. I think they thought this was done with David Hume or something. I don't know. I was just sort of like, I remember as an undergrad, I thought this was just a fascinating problem. And I remember going to this professor and they were like, we don't think about that anymore. It's like, no, you should think about it. It's a confusion of is and ought.
Mm-hmm.
It's a confusion of how things are with the way things ought to be. And so, and it is tremendously, I'll use a religious word, why not? It's miraculous. It's miraculous that these systems exist. It's miraculous. It is absolutely mind-blowing. There's no way I can wrap my mind around it. That doesn't mean they're good.
Mm-hmm.
They are not, in fact, synonymous with good.
Yeah. So I guess it's kind of like
does that make sense?
Egg problem. What do we mean by good? Because if you have this sort of more metaphysical conception of good, like whatever the good is, it exists independently of us, then I can see where you're coming from. But then if you have a different definition to say good is like whatever we evolved to think good is, because it, then.
Absolutely. So that you bring up something, actually, that's really smart. I hadn't thought about that at all. Another reason these terms exist is because of what I would call, which is related to uncertainty, is fear of relativism.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't want to, goodness sort of in a deep way, it can't be relative. Like if it's the right decision, it's the right decision, and I don't want to, this is not the place to get into discussion of relativism or anything like that. But I think there's something inside us that really rebels at the idea that goodness is arbitrary, or that goodness, or even that we're in control of goodness. Like I think we sense that there's like a tremendous hubris embedded in that. And so we outsource that goodness to forces beyond and before ourselves.
Right. It's really strange because we have that intuitive belief, but then when we look at biology, we don't really seem to map that onto any other species. Like, especially if it's a predator, we don't view that as murder. If it's like a praying mantis who eats its mating partner right after they finish, it's like, we couldn't get away with that, but we don't say it's morally wrong for them.
That's right. We don't even, and likewise, I'm totally on board. In the same way, when we see animals in horrific pain, I mean, I write about this in the book, but it's like, this is obviously not a good system. Like, if we were hyenas, right, which I talk about in the birth chapter, you should all go out and I'm not going to tell you about the hyenas. You go buy the book, people listening to this, and find out how hyenas give birth. But I'll tell you this much: it is fucked up. No, as Darwin said, like no pure and good like designer would make like parasitic wasps that like lay their eggs in like worm head. You know what I mean? It's just like it's yeah. And so you're right. I mean, and if what you're saying, Adam, is just like, if what you're saying is something that I said to myself when I think about these things, which is that like, but how in the world could you possibly believe this? Because with a moment's reflection, like it does not take a rocket scientist to poke holes in this idea. My 10-year-old daughter could do it and she'd be right. But like I said before, fear, pain, and confusion can make us believe the smartest of us, smart in the like sense that people care about, but actually doesn't matter, can make the smartest of us, not the wisest, the smartest of us believe the most outlandish things.
So I want to run by you like an evolutionary theory of goodness that could be interpreted either in the relativistic sense or saying there's like some higher goodness out there. Are you familiar with tit for tat in evolutionary game theory?
No, tell me about it.
So it's related to the problem of the prisoner's dilemma.
Okay.
So it's a sort of a cooperation game. In the original format, it's something like, imagine you and your partner are both at risk of going to jail. And if no one speaks, you both get like 1 year in prison. If you rat out your partner and they don't rat you out, then you go free and they get 10 years. And if you both rat each other out, you both get 5 years, something like that.
Okay. Wait, what happens? Wait, sorry. What happens if you don't rat them out and they don't rat you out? What happens?
Then you both get 1 year.
Oh, okay.
So the idea is,
do you get to be there? Wait, do you get to be there together, or is that not a part of the experiment?
I don't think that matters. So the idea
no,
is that,
wait, Adam, that does matter.
Do you get to be there together in prison as opposed to
that's right
separate cells?
That's right.
I don't think it's part of the. I don't think it's stated.
Maybe you can do a study where that's brought in because that's essential.
Okay.
You understand why? Wait, no, I know you want to go on with it. I know, but it's really important. Do you understand why it's essential?
How much you like your partner.
That's right. Well, I thought you meant by partner, romantic partner.
Oh, I was thinking partner in crime.
It does. You're right. Go on. Okay, go on. I love it. Keep going.
So the idea is that in either case, you're incentivized to rat each other out. So, if your partner is not going to say anything, then if you don't say anything, you get 1 year in prison. But if you rat them out, you walk free. And if your partner is going to rat on you, you get 10 years if you don't say anything, but you only get 5 years if you do.
Okay.
So that's the traditional format. Although then economists took that and made a similar game. So this time it's like a trading game. So you can choose to cooperate or not cooperate. And this is why it's more important than the prisoner's dilemma part, because now if you're rather than being punished, if it's a reward, you can do repeated trials. So the idea is something like, if you both cooperate, you both get maybe like $5.
Okay.
If you cooperate and your partner doesn't, they get $10 and you get nothing. And then if neither of you cooperate, you both get nothing. The numbers might be different, but it's something like that. It's another one of those things where within a single trial, you're incentivized to screw over your partner. But over repeated trials, it makes sense to cooperate because then you both gain something.
Yeah. So, do you know what the out is, by the way, of all of these? Can I just tell you what the out is?
Sure.
The out is that 10 years in prison, having not ratted your partner out, is better than freedom, knowing that you ratted your partner out. And the money that you get from ratting the person out is like ashes in your mouth.
Okay,
that's why they don't make sense.
What's cool about this evolutionary theory is that that's your perspective, but you could say that you evolved to have that perspective precisely because of our incentive towards cooperation. So if you play this game with AI and you look for an optimal pattern of behavior, you get this pattern of tit for tat. So you don't want to always cooperate, because then you could play against someone who always screws you over, and every single time they win. You don't want to always be selfish, because then you can never reap the rewards of cooperation. So the most efficient strategy turns out to be tit for tat. So you start off cooperating and you cooperate as long as they do. If they screw you over, the next round you punish them back, but then you revert to cooperation as long as they don't do it again. Okay. So that looks to us like a strategy that is very fair. And at first I was thinking about it like, oh, cool, the AI learned to be fair. And then I started thinking, no, wait, our conceptions of fair evolved in this way precisely because it turned out to be the most optimal strategy over an evolution.
Let me think about that for a second. Got it. Yep. Okay.
Yeah. So that's the idea of, it seems like what we consider good could have actually been derived from something that's just more out there that turned out to be like a mathematically optimal solution of engaging in a cooperative game over evolution.
You mean like my altruistic understanding of what's good is a way of opting out of the mathematically fair,
or I think
optimization.
The way I interpreted it is our conceptions of good were shaped by doing what's optimal. So you could say that the AI learns to be good, or you could say that our conception of good like was rooted in this, basically this mathematically optimal solution. So
but is our, I see what you're saying, but isn't our conception of isn't the pinnacle of goodness in most cultures, right, is like self-sacrifice, like goodness as we understand it is opting out of that game. Right. So it's the people that are like, I'm just going to be kind, right? The martyr, because like with parenting, for example, or something like, there's all kinds of, I think you're right that I think our understanding of what's fair, what's just, I think you're absolutely right. And it's fascinating that I think our idea of justice came out of that. So we came up with justice systems and ideas of what deserving, like, do you deserve this or whatever? I think you're right that our idea of what's deserved or just emerged out of like mapping back onto optimal. I think that makes a lot of sense. It's just there's a difference between our conception of justice and our conception of goodness.
Right. And it seems like you can arrive at that conclusion through either a more optimistic or more cynical view, because you could say something like the martyr is genuinely doing something good and they're getting closer to an ideal of goodness than most of us actually achieve. You could also take the more cynical view of saying something like, martyrdom is only praised because it benefits everyone else. So it's kind of like this evolutionary strategy of like, as long as it benefits the group, who cares about the individual?
Right, I got you. Yeah. But I'm not as convinced about that as I am about the first thing you said.
Where do you think that belief comes from?
Which one?
The belief in the former case, like goodness existing as this thing outside of ourselves that we can strive towards.
The same place that our belief in free will comes from.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, then there are plenty of people who want to tear down that belief as well.
Yeah, they can try as hard as they want.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I'm not going to say, I don't mean like intellectually they won't succeed, but you will not be able to get rid of that belief in people because it's self-evident.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, so you could convince, I mean, people could talk, and people may say, like, I've encountered people, like Sapolsky or whatever, like, who are like, well, free will doesn't really exist. But it's interesting that when Sapolsky writes about it, I'm sure if you're familiar with his arguments about this, but like,
a little bit, yeah.
Basically he says, he's saying it in the context of justice.
Mm-hmm.
So what he's saying is we should not have a justice system that assumes people are making evil choices.
Right.
Or any choices at all. Our justice system is not going to function properly if the system believes in free will, which I think that's fascinating. I think it's a very interesting idea. But when it comes to like human beings themselves as individuals, you and me not believing in free will, people might say they don't believe in it intellectually, like they might be like, we ran an experiment, or like we did whatever, I don't care how much proof you have. You will never ever overcome the immediate sense of being able to will things that is a part of what it is to be a human.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm saying is, I think when you ask that question, where does this belief in goodness that is outside of ourselves, right, as opposed to simply an adaptive thing, a relativist thing, or whatever, I think it comes from the same place in a certain way that our belief in free will does. It's we simply have felt it.
Okay, so tell me if you think this is a
And
paradox.
it's interesting that now we're not talking about naturalness anymore, but I love it. This is a great conversation.
I'm about to tie it back into naturalness.
Oh no, so, you're playing the long game.
On the surface, it seems paradoxical to me that you're making an argument for there being some sort of natural good that we should strive towards, and simultaneously in the book I think so.
No.
Okay. So the idea of goodness, this almost like this metaphysical concept we were just talking about, do you think that's natural?
No. I don't think it's natural.
That's interesting. I interpreted all that as being natural. Like if it's outside of ourselves, then it must be just something that exists naturally. What's the alternative to that?
Well, I mean, you're not going to like this answer, but it's what I believe. It's a mystery.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually does tie back to naturalness, right?
Yeah.
Which is that for many people, most people, almost all people, that is a shitty answer. It's unacceptable. It is uncertain. It is ambiguous. It doesn't have any of the power of all of the traditional answers like natural or God or even relativism or optimization or utility, right? There is the idea that all of those answers are wrong because they pretend to solve the riddle is not satisfying to people. But like, man, it is what it is. That's what it is. It's a riddle.
Yeah. Okay, so that will resolve the paradox then, but it'll open the doors to a more interesting argument, because in this case, you have one sense of a belief in something that's good. And then also the argument that many people have other beliefs in what is natural and what is good, but they're wrong. So in the book, you're identifying cases where people believe that something is natural and good, but it's actually counterproductive to society.
That's right. Yeah. So you're saying, what you're saying the paradox is that on the one hand, I'm saying that what's good is a mystery. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, I'm saying that what's natural isn't good. They're wrong. And that's the paradox?
That's close. It was a paradox at first when I thought you said it wasn't a mystery, but goodness is just natural. So that would be closer to a paradox. But now if we accept the mystery answer, and I'm willing to accept that, you could also
that's awesome.
You could also say that the people making claims about what's natural then don't need to justify it. They could just say, this is what I believe. So
no, they
why
can't.
argue
They're
against it?
wrong, but they're wrong.
Okay, maybe we should use a specific case study example of a belief in something natural that we think is a bad belief.
Okay.
Take your pick.
Jeez. I mean, any of them. How about this? Let me try to think of the strongest possible argument for natural goodness, and then we can sort of poke at that, right? I like to steel man my opponents. It is the love of a parent for their child is natural. And therefore, to not love a child of your own is unnatural and bad because it is unnatural or something like that.
So is the idea imagine. You agree with the former, but you disagree with that latter conclusion, or do you disagree with
That's exactly right. So I agree that the love of a parent for a child is a natural, I mean, generally speaking, is a natural, right? It's a natural law in that sense, biologically, right? If you ask any evolutionary biologist or anybody, right? Like, well, it depends on the species, certainly for humans, right?
Certainly in
mammals. That's
just,
yeah, certainly in mammals, right? Like, that's just natural. I don't agree that the reason not loving your child might be wrong is because it is unnatural.
So then you would view that as, let's say, the natural consequence of, well, could be any number of things. It could be drug addiction. It could be mental health problems. It could be environmental stress.
You mean like why the person doesn't love their kid?
Yeah,
it could be all kinds of things. What I'm saying is that the reason if it is wrong to not love your kid, it's not wrong because it's unnatural. It's wrong for other reasons.
What would it mean if it was wrong? Because what would, and this could have to do with loving your kid or really any example. What does it mean for something to be wrong on the grounds of unnatural?
It means nothing, Adam. That's why it's such a bizarre and stupid idea. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. It doesn't make any sense. So like on the one hand, this is why it's so perplexing. I mean, I'm with you, man. I'm with you. It doesn't make any sense at all to say that something, unless natural means God, right? Or holy or something, and unnatural means unholy, well, that's the only way it can make sense of it. Otherwise, as you said, it's like shooting fish in a barrel to come up with counterexamples. I mean, there's so many that I don't even know where you would start.
Okay, here's another point that I hope might contribute to the steel manning. So so if something is natural and that natural thing is good, then without it, I agree that you're not automatically in negative unnatural territory, but best case, you're at a neutral. And then, so I guess this might relate to like the philosophical problem of, let's say it's sort of like a trolley problem, but someone is just going to die unless you pull the lever, and you could save them by pulling the lever, and there's nothing bad on the other side. So it's like, if you sit back and do nothing, is that just morally neutral, or is it actually a bad thing? Like, so here's the connection here.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
It's like, is it the case that not doing the thing that's natural and good is merely neutral, or is it the case that if you don't do what's natural and good, that you're actually doing something unnatural and bad? I think that would be the stronger argument.
The naturalness is, so what I'm saying is naturalness is totally unrelated to goodness. They're just completely different things. But here's why I think people might confuse them. And again, Sapolsky was helpful this time when I was interviewing him, or maybe he wrote it in his book. I forget. Smart dude. He said, wise dude. Sorry, wise. He said, when something is natural versus unnatural, what that tells you is how hard it is going to be, relatively speaking, to do it or not do it. Which is why people say, oh, this comes naturally to me. What they really mean is it's like the path of least resistance, right? It's like, it's very easy to love your child. It is very difficult to not love your child. It's very easy to fall into natural gender roles. That doesn't mean though, and then that ties to things like efficiency, and utility and that sort of thing. But again, utility is not what's good. That's just not what's good until you've expanded that term out to the point that it just means good, right? It collapsed it into itself, at which point it's just a tautology, you know?
Mhm.
So I think that's where people might be getting confused. And I think that is true, right? Natural law. So it's like, you know, it's not natural to fly. So it's going to take a lot of effort to fly if you
Right.
want to, you know, it took us a long time to get airplanes, you know?
Mhm.
So that makes a lot of sense. And I'm totally with people, right? If we discover that something is natural, we need to like, you know, like pull up our pants and like get ready for some tough struggles if we want to like push back against
Mhm.
it, you know? But and there's all kinds of things that are unnatural, you know, that we do that with all the time. We're like, here's a natural desire, here's a natural inclination, we got to fight against it. We put all sorts of safeguards in place, you know, and we're better for it.
Mhm. Right. So that framing is really useful for me, because I was definitely making the connection between natural and good. But the path of least resistance idea, thinking about it in an evolutionary framework, it does make sense that we would come to conceive of the good as what is the path of least resistance.
Without a doubt. Yep. Except that, well, this is getting into a different area that I don't know. I'm less comfortable talking about because it's personal, but I think that's an illusion. I do not, in fact, think that the path of least resistance is natural either. I believe that, yeah, I'm not comfortable talking about that. But yeah,
Okay.
it does make sense that we would come to that conclusion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what's the call to action here? If there are certain beliefs in things as either being natural that aren't natural, or things being unnatural that and bad, but we can't really make a case that things are either unnatural or, even if they are, bad because of it, what do we do about that?
Well, if what you're saying is like, what's the call to action when I'm saying that we need to stop, like end this confusion?
Mm-hmm.
My call to action is that the antidote is to be more comfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity and mystery.
Mm-hmm.
So the engine of delusion or pain or fear, which is what allows us to believe these absolutely manifestly insane things, like not nature is good, right? I mean, it's like, if you think about it for a second, it's like, to me, it's like, wait a second. Yeah, this is why, you know, the people who don't, everyone has their own versions of these things, right? It's not, people don't, not everyone is into naturalness, right? Other people are in other delusions that come out of fear and uncertainty, right? But in this case, right, and it's the same for all of those other delusions, but that's a much longer conversation. Um, it's just, I think we need to look at it and we need to be like, okay, the problem, as I see it at least, is our discomfort with ambiguity and uncertainty. We don't know how to deal with those. We don't know how to deal with mystery. We are unable to accept it. And so what we do is we then manufacture falsehoods to help us cope.
Mm-hmm.
And those falsehoods are dangerous. It's false.
Right.
So what's the antidote is to be like, okay, well, I know the problem. Instead of manufacturing falsehoods to address it, why not try a different approach, which is to say, cultivate comfort with ambiguity and mystery.
Mm-hmm. Do you think this
That's the call to
relates
action.
to Nietzsche's death of God idea? The idea that in more secular societies, as religious belief goes down, there's sort of this void. So I guess you need to take the initial premise that humans have some sort of impulse for religious belief, but then if you accept that claim, and if traditional religious belief goes down, then there's going to be essentially a religious void, and other things like nature start to become deified.
So I've heard this. I've talked about this thesis. This is not a good thesis, and I'll tell you why. This is not a like religion-shaped hole in people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
Plenty of religious people also believe in naturalness.
Mm-hmm.
It is not a like zero-sum game. You know, it's like you can be superstitious and religious. There's not a lot of, I mean, there's a little bit of evidence that like superstition isn't as common among religious people, but frankly, between you and me, I think that's because they just feel guilty even confessing it on the survey. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
Like, It's not like that. It is not a zero-sum game. You can see, the most secular countries in the world, according to traditional definitions of religion, are not the most superstitious. It's not like over in the Netherlands, they're like, it is always naturalness all the time. They're like, knocking on wood everywhere, right? Like, that's just not how it is. In fact, so you see what I'm saying? So
right.
like, it's not a religion-shaped hole. It's rather, it is that in all sorts of idiosyncratic ways, we multiply these entities or concepts or heuristics, whatever you want to call them, to deal with this shit, and we've always done it, and it's always been a problem. And the problem with people like Nietzsche, in my opinion, or Freud, is, it's funny, Freud, like no one likes him in religious studies anymore. They probably don't like him in psychology either. But that man was a genius. He was a genius. He was a genius, and he was right about a lot of stuff, like Nietzsche. He was also an asshole. And he went into people. He actually patronized people. I mean, if you remember in Future of an Illusion, right? He's like, well, you can believe what you want if you want to be like little kids, right? You want to be like kids? You want to believe in Santa Claus? I can't prove Santa Claus doesn't exist. So like, more power to you, man. Like, what a dick, Like, the thing is, with people like Nietzsche and Freud, they're so upset, I think, about the falsehood that they have, in my opinion, accurately identified, that they just go and like rip people's security blankets away from them and like glory in it. Like they're just like romping through the church, destroying everything. And the problem is, like, you can't do that.
Right.
It's not okay. Like, I didn't learn this until too late in my life. Like, that's just not an okay thing to do. You're going to destroy people.
So I've heard arguments that it's also patronizing to say something along the lines of, people need their security blankets, and who are we to take it away? Because it almost presumes that you're one of the few people who doesn't need the security blanket, but that the average person is so different that you need to look out for them.
That's right. Everybody has security blankets. Freud had security blankets. Nietzsche had security blankets. And the people who don't have security blankets keep that shit to themselves. You know what I mean? Maybe you don't, but that's a longer conversation.
That last part, I don't know. The people.
Yeah, that's a different conversation.
Don't have security blankets, keep it to themselves. What do you mean by
that?
Oh, do you mean religious belief?
No. I mean, the security blanket is not religion. Remember, Freud had security blankets. Nietzsche had security blankets. They probably believed that if they just did this enough, if they just smashed enough stuff, the world would improve. Maybe they believed that if they smashed enough stuff, they'd be happy. Maybe they believed, maybe their heuristic was telling the truth all the time. Maybe that's how they overcame uncertainty. I don't know. Freud. I'm no psychoanalyst. I don't know what his mom did to him. I'm kidding. But what I'm saying is, like, what I'm saying is this. If you want to get rid of, if what you want to do is get rid of people's security blankets, you don't have to say, let people have their security blankets. And you don't have to say, let's take away their security blankets. You can stop talking about security blankets and start addressing why they have the security blanket in the first place.
Right.
So, like, take a kid. Let's do the actual literal version of this. If a kid has a security blanket that they're carrying around with them the whole time, you don't address it by like ripping their security blanket. I mean, some terrible parent might, right? I'm not a terrible parent. Sorry, parents who did that to their kids. They're going to be fine. You're like, okay, why does the kid still have the security blanket? Why do they need it? And the answer, of course, for children, as with adults, is because they fear uncertainty. And so what do? you try in various ways either to give people certainty about the things that they need to be certain about, right? And that's like, so we've done that, right? As a culture, like we like food, right? Think about evolutionary stuff. We're like, okay, we need security blankets because we don't know if we're going to starve or not. Like, let's make sure that everyone has enough food, right? We went a little too far with that. Or like, you know what I mean, right? Like, let's make sure that animals aren't going to eat us. Let's make sure, whatever. So one thing to do is try to create certainty about the things that are naturally important to us. Like, there's just no way. I mean, you can overcome your desire to eat, but that's a very difficult thing. Instead, why not just give people the food they need, So that's one thing you can do. But unfortunately, that's not even the only or most important thing. And people are still going to be uncertain about all kinds of stuff. Kids are too, right? So what do? You help them be comfortable with that uncertainty in a way that doesn't require a blanket.
Mm-hmm.
And how you do that?
How?
You love them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So another interesting philosophical debate we could talk about is the Hobbesian versus Russoian views of the natural state of human nature. It's like, are we emerging from something that was like natural chaos and we're creating something that's better but unnatural? Or are we striving towards like something that's this natural harmony that we just hadn't unlocked yet, but we're making this natural progression?
We'll have a chapter on this. Did you read the chapter?
No.
Adam, that was great. I love it. Thank you for just telling me that. I don't care. Half the time I've never read anything. So what I would say about that is that both Hobbes and Rousseau are locked in an argument over this particular security blanket, right? You could have the same thing with God, right? It's like arguments over whether God exists or not, like whether it's just a waste of time. That argument is a waste of time. And the only reason people think it's important is because so many people think it's important. But it's just not helpful. Why? Who cares? I don't know.
I guess it would be important if you have the initial belief that naturalness and goodness are the same thing. But if you decouple them, then that's right. No point.
That's exactly right. Then it's just a pointless argument. In the same way that like arguing over the existence of God is pointless if you don't think God and goodness are identical. And if you think of God as an originating force, right, the unmoved mover in Aristotle, if that's what God is, that's basically nature, right? It's a very mysterious thing that's beyond and before human beings, and that's great. But like, if you decouple that from goodness, which is actually in very interesting ways what early Taoist texts do, then there's nothing to argue over.
Right.
It just doesn't matter. There's a mysterious originating force, and we can talk, and philosophers can talk about that, and astronomers can study it, and like, that's really great, and I love that. I think that stuff is all really important and interesting. But it just has nothing to do with whether or not you should love people. That's just like, they're separate questions.
So arguments in favor of coupling this idea of naturalness and goodness, it seems pervasive in science, because it's like, why would we do science at all if we didn't think that understanding the natural world better would make our lives better? And it can. All of the results have.
But it does. Understanding what's natural can make our lives better, not because what's natural is better, but because the more truths we understand about the world, the more equipped we are to do good things.
So do you think that is evidence?
Truth is a good thing.
Truth is good. Yeah, that was about to be the question. Because I could see arguments on either side. You could say truth is good, so more truth is better. Or you could say something like truth is neutral, but more truth means you could utilize it for more good.
Yeah, I think that's one of those great philosophical debates. I think truth is intrinsically good. And that's why it's good to study nature, right? I mean, that's, what's natural. But it's not because natural is good, it's because it is true. And truth is wonderful thing.
Yeah, that sounds like the Spinoza argument.
Yeah, Spinoza, though, it's funny. Well, yeah, it's a longer conversation.
We've got time.
Yeah, I mean, when you haven't suffered a lot, you know what I mean? Not like little sufferings, you know, like everyone stubs their toe. And everyone even like, you know, everyone like gets jealous or whatever, you know, but like when you haven't suffered, you can come to confuse your beliefs and your approach with the cause of your absence of suffering. And so, and which is another way of saying you can confuse them with the truth. And so, but what's really happened is you're just lucky.
Right.
And of course, you know, you're going to get people who are really lucky, right? That's just how it is. Billions of people, you know, some people are just going to luck into it. Like it's just going to be incredibly lucky. And they're going to be like, holy moly, my approach to life, my set of beliefs is how it is. And in fact, they might even say things like, well, the world is obviously a good place, right? It's the best of all possible worlds, whatever it is, right? And the reason people aren't seeing that truth is because they don't know what I know. And they don't live the way I live.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Is this related to your new book at all? What you're working on, the Gentleman and the Jester?
Oh, interesting. Sort of. Although that book got sidelined. I'm working on other stuff now. That project I've started to realize I may not ever actually write, not because I don't want to, I don't think it's good, but because I don't know that a book is the right way to do it. I think the right way to do it is to do it.
Yeah, I only saw a single sentence about it on your website, but I saw that it's about ethical education. And so that was making me think about the idea of like, you know, how much of our ethical values are sort of transcendent versus based on, you know, our environmental circumstances. Are we just lucky? So we believe that things are a certain way.
Right. And well, so I'm very interested in luck. That's another thing I work on and think about a lot. But I mean, I would say, I mean, I'll tell you this much. Having come to the conclusions that I've come to, one of the things I'm really interested in doing in whatever ways I can, and so everything I'm working on right now is sort of, I think, in certain ways related to this, is I really want people to be more comfortable with uncertainty and mystery. So what's interesting to me, and this is actually, I'm working on a very short essay about this. So a lot of religious traditions, but also secular ideologies and cultures, they have built into them engines of ambiguity. So in theology, there's this kind of theology called apophatic theology. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but apophasis means unsaying. So like phatic, like is language, like to unsay something. And it's just fascinating. There are these apophatic theologians who, what they do is they will do things like they'll say, God is good, God is not good, God is large, God is not large, God is human, God is not human, God is a tree, God is not a tree. And they use language to create endless paradoxes about the divine in the context of Taoism, early Taoism. The most famous example of this is the first line of the Tao Te Ching, which is the Tao that is the Tao is not the Tao. Hell is that? The whole book's about the Tao.
Like
what are you doing?
Of it that you can comprehend is not the actual thing that exists outside of our comprehension, is something like that.
Well, no, because as soon as you try to say what it is, it's not.
Right.
So even what you just did is in trouble. And what I'm doing is in trouble. You know what I mean? Like, and we have these engines in a lot of different contexts. So in a secular context, we have jesters, right? What are jesters? They're people empowered to violate all of the norms of the king's court. Now they work for the king, And a king who doesn't take their jesters seriously becomes a tyrant. But I think good kings understand that they need jesters around, you know? That's what you need. You need someone who can speak truth to power. And since organization is a form of power, you need, that is to say, categorization or naming things or whatever it is, right? Like superimposing things onto reality is a form of power, deciding what gets superimposed where, right? Whether it's political or religious. Then you need things that that speak truth to that kind of power. Now, I happen to believe personally, and this happens in every era, or maybe it happens at all moments, so I'm very suspicious of nostalgia. But right now, there are lots of ways in which the previous generation of jesters and engines of ambiguity are failing us. So the comedians are turning into preachers.
Right.
And I don't mean this is a bipartisan, global problem, and that worries me a great deal. And so I personally am working on how to either hire some new folks for the job or put some more engines in, like grease the gears, right? This is the metaphor I have. Maybe Adam, you can help me with a better metaphor, because this metaphor is so not like profound sounding, but it's the best one I've got. Those things are the spandex in like the pants of our culture, our ideology, right? Like all religions need that, and all cultures need that, and all people, individuals need that in themselves, in their families, in their cultures. Because when you don't have that give, right, the pants can't stretch when you've eaten too much, and they can't shrink when you've, and what happens instead is they just tear. Another way of thinking about it is like, flexibility. It's like, the gear, it's the oil, it's the grease in the gears, right? And like if you don't have it in there, they just lock. And then the machine just like explodes, right? Things snap, things get rigid, things get fragile. Like another way to think about this is that you need those things for resilience. Resiliency is the ability to change, and the ability to change involves having something inside the system that's outside of the system, which is a paradox.
Right.
But then again, that's what I'm going for.
Right. So too much order is rigid and tyrannical, and too much chaos is sort of self-evidently a bad thing. So you need a bit of chaos so that that your society remains malleable enough to deal with new challenges.
There it is.
It's a good place to close.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time, Alan.
Thanks for having me. You're going to do awesome stuff. I can't wait to hear what you work on.
Me too. Thanks.